بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. So after the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Amina, the mother of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, nursed him for some time. And there was also 3 other women who nursed Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We talked a little bit about them last week, but just to give a refresher, there is Thuwayba. Thuwayba radiallahu anha used to be Abu Lahab's servant. So the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Lahab, had a servant by the name of Thuwayba. And out of the joy that Abu Lahab experienced when he found out about the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he freed his servant Thuwayba. And it's unfortunate that later on down the line, Abu Lahab is going to be known as one of the most staunch enemies of Islam. And when Abu Lahab passed away, there's reports that we have seen where some of his family members had a dream about Abu Lahab and asked him, what did he find in the Akhirah? And Abu Lahab said that all I have found is nothing good and punishment and bad awaiting for me, except for a small sip of water that I will receive as comfort out of the moment of love he had for Rasulullah ﷺ that caused him to free Thuwayba. So Thuwayba radiallahu anha was someone who lived a long life, lived to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, accepted Islam. Prophet ﷺ was very generous with her, saw her as a mother, saw her as someone who had a big impact in his life. So not only was he generous with her, but he was generous with his entire family. And even after Thuwayba passed away, he continued to be generous with her family as well. And then there's Barakah, who was also known as Ayman. Barakah was a servant of Abdullah, a servant of Abdullah. Abdullah is the father of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She was an Abyssinian woman. And when Abdullah passed away, the Prophet ﷺ essentially inherited Ayman. And she took a motherly role in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ used to call her Ya Ya. This was the how the Prophet ﷺ used to address Ayman, Barakah radiallahu anha. And she plays a very critical role in the Seerah. She plays a very motherly role to Rasulullah ﷺ. Later on in the Seerah, she marries the companion by the name of Zayd bin Haritha, who is also known as the adopted son of Rasulullah ﷺ. And she also has Usama bin Zayd, right, who is known, to be of the beloved of Rasulullah ﷺ, because not only did Usama bin Zayd come from the adopted son of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but also the mother of Rasulullah ﷺ as well, Ayman, as well, was both of them had Usama bin Zayd. So Usama bin Zayd had a very special place in the heart of Rasulullah ﷺ. Now, out of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's 3, we'll call them milk mothers, Rida, milk mothers, those who nursed Rasulullah ﷺ as a kid. Out of Muhammad's 3 milk mothers that are not including Amina, 2 of them were African women. And 2 of them were black women. So Barakah, Ayman, was Abyssinian, and also so was Thuwayba. And this is very important because at this point in time in the region, if we have been keeping up, that at this time in that region, in that culture, racism was very prevalent against Africans. Right? The Quraysh had such a large superiority complex that they were racist towards Arabs themselves. So the Quraysh thought of themselves as the purest Arabs, and any other Arabs were below us. So let alone any other race, right? Africans, Europeans, Asians, it didn't matter. They would have extreme racial superiority complex of the Quraysh and of the Arabs. And it's the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ who came and taught us that there's no Arab who has superiority over a black person, or no black person who has a superiority over an Arab, but rather superiority comes with taqwa and piety only. And so it's very beautiful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divinely arranged that two of the milk mothers of the Prophet ﷺ, two people who have a critical role in the development and character of Rasulullah ﷺ, would be those who were looked down upon in society. As a matter of fact, as well, we see later on that the paternal aunt of Rasulullah ﷺ was actually albino as well. And so there's a lot that is going on there. Now this is important because the Rida, Sharia-wise, not only does someone take the role of a mother once they're a nurse, meaning that if someone nurses a child, nurses a baby, that individual, that woman, does not need to observe hijab to the one that she nursed. They actually have a motherly role in Sharia, right? And anyone else that person has nursed becomes a milk sibling of that person. And not only that, but the nursing mother's own children become siblings to the one that was nursed. And the mother's husband, the milk husband, is also considered a mahram as well. So through this, it's a family tie that is being established. Okay? Very important. So Barakah was so dear to the Prophet ﷺ that he would call her Ya and introduced her as his mother. After Thuwayba was freed on the day that the Prophet ﷺ was given birth, she remained close to that family and nursed that family and nursed the infant Rasulullah ﷺ. And she also nursed Hamza radiallahu anhu, right, the uncle, the young uncle of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And finally, there's one more. Her name is Halima Sa'diyya. Her real name is Halima bint Abu Dhuwayb. Her father's actual name was Abdullah ibn Harith. And she was from the tribe of Banu Sa'd, which is why she's called Halima as-Sa'diyya. And she is the third and final milk mother of the Prophet ﷺ, other than Amina, of course. Abdul Muttalib, after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was born, he desired that his grandson will be sent to a Bedouin land so that he can grow up there, so that he can be strong, so that he can be intelligent, he can be healthy. At that time, when you grew up in a Bedouin land, it was advantageous for multiple reasons. One is there was less foot traffic there. It was less foot traffic. So you were forced to engage with the world. Meaning those who grew up in Bedouin lands, they had to grow their own food. They had to care for animals. They learned these hard skills at a very young age. They also developed pure Arabic eloquent language. Because in Mecca, there was so much business, so much foot traffic happening. There was so much different dialects that were also being spoken in Mecca during Hajj and other seasons. So Abdul Muttalib didn't want Rasulullah ﷺ to have an Arabic that was, mixed in. So we see like today we have so many dialects in Arabic. Egyptians saying Gim, Egyptians throwing French in their Arabic, and all this random stuff. So Abdul Muttalib wanted his son to have that pure Arabic, and the Bedouin tribes, because they weren't interacting with the different tribes and languages amongst the Arabian lands during Hajj and other times of the year, the Prophet ﷺ being raised in the Bedouin lands would help him develop very early on a strong, pure Arabic language, which is very important when it comes to how he's going to communicate with his companions and how he was going to come to not only receive revelation, but he has to teach revelation. So in order for him to be able to teach revelation, he has to know the language at its pure, at its heart. And also lastly, it prevented diseases. So again, because there's so much foot traffic, right? There's diseases coming from all these different lands. It was a very high infant mortality rate in Mecca. So to prevent their children from being infected with disease very early on, they would send them to these Bedouin lands to take time and not be exposed to illnesses so that they can take time to develop their immune systems. So it was a common problem at that time, right? Especially if the newborn was a male, because the lineage is established through the male, and he would be the one to carry on his family language, was very important. So what happened is there was a group of women from a tribe called the Banu Sa'd. who came to Mecca to go and get the newborn children. What had happened is the wealthy families would basically offer money to the women of Banu Sa'd to take their children and to take them to the Bedouin lands and so they can be raised there. So they started looking for the wealthy families. And it was almost like a first come, first served type of practice. And these women would keep the Qurayshi kids for a minimum of 2 years. And those Qurayshi families would pay them for their services, a very hefty amount as well. It wasn't cheap. So during that time, these women would bring these kids back to visit their families sometimes, or the families themselves would go to the countryside or the Bedouin lands and visit their kids. And so it was more of an incentive to seek out the newborns of wealthier Qurayshi families. Halima was married to a man by the name of Al-Harith ibn Abdul Uzza from Banu Sa'd. Their children, they had 3 other children. They had a son named Abdullah. They had a daughter named Unaysa. They had a daughter named Judama, who was also known as Shayma. She's commonly known as Shayma. That is what she's probably known as. And Shayma is actually going to play a role later on in the Seerah as well, where she visits the Prophet ﷺ in Medina. So, now, it was a year of drought in the Banu Sa'd area. There's not a lot of food, plants are dying, animals are dying. It was so severe. Many of the women of Banu Sa'd who had young children themselves, they had to go to Mecca to become wet nurses to help out other families so that they can help out their own. So about 10 women rode out on a long journey to Mecca. And they traveled on mules or donkeys because it was a very long journey. And for those who weren't experienced riders, mules and donkeys were actually more comfortable because a camel can be uncomfortable to ride on if you're not experienced, even though they can travel longer and maybe carry more. Now, Halima, her husband, Al-Harith, and their infant son, Abdullah, all traveled together on this journey. And they left their 2 daughters behind with another family. Halima's family was one of the poorest families in the area. And the mule that Halima was riding on was very weak and it was moving very slowly. Remember, there's a drought, so it's affecting even the animals as well. And they also had a camel that they brought with them, Al-Harith brought a she-camel. And they brought this camel for milk for the journey, but due to the drought and lack of grazing area, the animals were struggling to produce milk as well. So now, due to the lack of food, Halima and her husband were now starving on this journey. And because Halima had no nutrition, she couldn't produce any milk herself to feed Abdullah. So it's a whole mess, whole issue. And because they were so slow, the other families that had been traveling with them had gone. And Halima's family had been left behind by themselves. So some way, somehow, with the himma and with strength, Halima and her family pushed forward. And when the Arabs were traveling, they would make camp before sunset because it was unsafe to travel at night in the desert. There was a lot of crime and criminal activity that would happen at night. So they would make camp before sunset and they would resume travel in the morning. One night, before they reached Mecca, their situation had been so severe that the baby Abdullah couldn't stop crying the entire night. And Halima and her husband couldn't sleep the entire night. They stayed up all night long. And still somehow they finally arrived to Mecca and they're tired, they're hungry, desperate. And they arrived to Mecca last out of all the women. And all the women of Banu Sa'd had already received babies and payments from the wealthy and influential families of Mecca. Halima Sa'diyya was the only one who was left without a baby to take in. So Halima now what she's doing is she's making rounds to look for any babies. She goes to every home and she's getting rejected in every home. But every single family had told her that there's one baby. There's one baby that no one has picked up yet. He is the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. He's this little young boy named Muhammed. Halima herself, she later narrates that when every single home would tell me about this baby, I would immediately think to myself, I don't want this baby. All the women of Banu Sa'd who arrived before told Halima that even they wouldn't take this baby. They know about this baby because they went to Banu Hashim to inquire about the newborns, and they found out that the baby is an orphan. Sure, the baby came from a good family. But Abdul Muttalib, he has to take care of Mecca. He has to take care of his whole extended family. He would be busy with other things. He would be busy providing for other children. And we're not sure how dependable Amina can be for money. And so since he has no father, we can't really be expecting so much money for Muhammad ﷺ, this little baby. And even if Amina was able to provide money, it still doesn't guarantee the other incentive that the women from Banu Sa'd would get connected to an important man in Mecca. And it was not a big-time hookup to have the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the infant Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, as someone that you're going to take care of. No one was motivated enough to take care of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So Halima Sa'diyya, she has no baby. And she feels kind of upset because she also doesn't want to go back and say, and everybody's going to say, oh, you didn't get a baby, everyone else got a baby. So she goes and she consults her husband, Al-Harith. And the last option is Muhammad, baby Muhammad. And she's talking to Al-Harith, her husband, and they're basically debating back and forth, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? And Al-Harith says, he may not be able, but if we take him, maybe Allah will give us blessings. So Halima Sa'diyya says, you know what, let's just do it. I agree. And they take him from Amina. There was one narration that says that when she went to Amina, when the wet nurse would come pick up the baby, it was a custom of the family that the wet nurse would be asked by the family to nurse the baby in front of them, kind of like an interview process. Assure us that our child is going to be comfortable with this woman. So the woman would be asked to nurse in front of the family. And remember, before this point, 2 days before, Halima Sa'diyya herself was not able to produce milk on her own for her son properly. She was so hungry herself, she couldn't produce milk for her baby. But as soon as Halima picked up baby Muhammad ﷺ and started nursing, she was able to feed him to his fill. She filled up with milk herself. She was very surprised. She went immediately and picked up her son Abdullah, who has been crying all night from lack of milk, and she sat down the infant Muhammad ﷺ after he finished, and then fed Abdullah to his fill as well. She didn't know what was going on, but she knew that she had to take advantage of this opportunity to feed her own son. And so it hit Halima Sa'diyya that Muhammad ﷺ was something special, was someone special. So now not only at first she was reluctant to take this child, now she's eager and asking for this child. Quickly, give him to me now. So Amina leaves. There's another narration that tells us that Abdul Muttalib spoke to Halima directly and asked her, who are you? And she said, I am a woman from Banu Sa'd. And he asked, what is your name? And she said, Halima. And so he responded, he said, well, Sa'd. Sa'd means happiness. And Hilm, right? Tolerance. Two characteristics where it is the best of this life and eternal dignity. So Abdul Muttalib hoped that Halima Sa'diyya would be the one to take the young baby Muhammad ﷺ, and alhamdulillah she did. And subhanAllah, little did she know that she was about to take home the messenger of Allah ﷺ, the greatest creation of all time. I think about this and I think about, subhanAllah, how salty, if you want to use that word, or how difficult it must have been for Amina to see her son not to be wanted. How difficult it is to see that her son is going to be neglected. Maybe this is his life. Maybe he's just going to live a life of neglect, a life of insecurity, a life of being alone, of being outcasted by society because he's an orphan. Right? No mother likes to see their child be the last pick on the basketball court or on the soccer field. It hurts them. No one wanted to take him home. And subhanAllah, Fast forward 1400 years later, and now billions of people follow. Millions of people every day will spend their life savings just to go visit the city of Medina and say, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah, at his grave. And he will be the greatest ummah on the day of judgment. On that day, no one wanted him, and now today, he's the most beloved figure on earth, and also the most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which teaches us something. It teaches us what? It teaches us that sometimes you have nothing. Sometimes you have nobody. Sometimes nobody wants you. But you never give up hope in them. Knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always take care of it if you are sincere. Will always take care of you. We're sincere and we're doing things for the sake of Allah and for the right reasons and constantly making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will always be there for us. Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakeel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sufficient for us. Another thing that is interesting to mention here is that it's important to reflect on what if Rasulullah grew up in our community. How many Islamic institutions would give him a place? Let's be honest. His family could not pay for the weekend classes. He could not pay for the fancy institutions. And so what I want to keep in mind here is that Islam is not something that is limited for the wealthy. Otherwise, the Prophet Muhammad would have never been admitted. Yes, I understand that institutions need to be funded, but there also needs to be a fund to not turn people away, regardless of their financial class. That everybody can benefit from this deen, because that is what this deen was set for. That's what Rasulullah was set for, Rahmatul Alameen. That's what the Kitab of Allah, the Quran, was set to. It was sent to everybody. Anyways, so Halima Sa'diyah, on their way to Mecca, she had a crying kid. She was not producing any milk. Her animal was slow. It was hot. It was bad financial circumstances. People were angry at her because she was so slow that sometimes they had to wait up for her, and then eventually they just gave up and left. Life was a mess. Like when you go hiking in a big group, and there's that one person that's everybody has to stand and wait for. Right, Yusuf? Where's Yusuf? Is Yusuf here? Yusuf is like, I'm that guy. That's why I'm saying that. But on the way home, everything changed. Halima Sa'diyah, she herself started to produce milk. Because let's be real here, Allah was not going to let His beloved go hungry, was it? And so Rasulullah ﷺ was able to feed to his fill whenever he needed it, and Abdullah was also able to feed to his fill. Both drank to their fill, both slept the whole night. Their camel filled up. And so even the parents were able to drink to their fill and sleep all night. And Halima, she narrates that when I look back, I think that was probably the most peaceful sleep I had ever had. I slept like babies. We slept like babies with our babies. And then her animal, who was so slow and hungry and tired and weak, suddenly became super fast. The old 1996 Toyota Corolla turned into a Ferrari. Tricked out the ride. NOS was put in, and then it was just going. Everybody around her was saying, slow down. What happened to your camel? What happened to your donkey? Why is it going so fast? And so the next morning they arrived home, and the entire area of Banu Sa'd was, again, stricken with drought. But suddenly the land that Al-Harith owned, it went from the worst, it was completely dry, it was completely barren and hard land, and all of a sudden it started to become green. And Halim and Al-Harith's livestock that was previously dying due to lack of grazing, they started to eat. And they started to become healthy. And what was previously difficult for them to negotiate with other landowners to allow Halim and Al-Harith herd to graze with other neighbors. The other neighbors didn't want that because they were also facing drought. And before they knew it, their region became the greenest. Their goats, their sheep, their cows began to graze to their fill, and they gave an abundance of milk. And soon enough, the family themselves of Al-Harith and Halima Sa'diyah, they were able to start a successful milk business because of this. And their neighbors' lands were still struggling with drought. They were still barren. And so they're going and they're seeing that their shepherds are coming back with their animals, and their animals are not being filled up, and they're looking at Al-Harith and Halima's animals that were previously so weak and thin and dying, and they're the ones coming back full and healthy. So some of the shepherds that were hired by these families, they were told, wherever Al-Harith and Halima are taking their animals, go take them there too. And they would go there and they would eat as well. But they would also come back, and they would not come back to their fill. It was reserved somehow in a miraculous way that only the animals of Halima Sa'diyah and Al-Harith were the ones that were benefiting the most. And the other women who brought kids from Mecca, they used to look at Halima with pity. She's Miskina of the group. She's got a broke husband. She's got dried up land, dry animals, dying animals. Halima was the one who they would feel bad for. Now the woman would tell Halima that you have acquired a huge blessing in your life, and there's no other explanation for this. What did you do? And Halima and Al-Harith's land was flourishing, their livestock and plenty of food. And it was all because of one reason. The kindness of Halima Sa'diyah and Al-Harith to take in Rasulullah despite not having financial incentive to do so, brought blessing into their life. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does for His friends. Even if all the asbab of the dunya, even if all the means of the dunya begin to close, He always takes care of His people. Those who struggle in the dunya and experience drought, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing a lofty and beautiful reward for them. And there's always a reward for sacrifice. So Halima and Al-Harith were able to determine that this baby, Muhammad was the reason that they now had so many blessings in their life. All of this turning of events were traced to the day that they picked up this yatim baby from Mecca. They also noticed that this Muhammad, this infant, ﷺ, had a nur to his face. He had an appealing look to his face. There was a magnetic quality about him that people would come over just to sit and hold him. The neighbors would come over just to sit and hold him and look at him. And as he grew to a toddler, Rasulullah didn't look like an average 2-year-old. He seemed taller than the average 2-year-old, stronger, more intelligent than the average 2-year-old. He was also very calm. He was very serene. He didn't throw tantrums or fits like a regular child or regular baby. And so because Halima knew that Muhammad was a very special child, and that he was the source of their new blessings, Halima Sa'diyah instructed her eldest daughter, Shayba, who we talked about, who was 5 years older than the Prophet Muhammad. She said to Shayba, listen, your brothers Abdullah and Muhammad are little kids. They run around, they do crazy things. And I want you to keep an eye on Muhammad. He's your responsibility. Right? Be a good older sister to them. You know, this narration always makes me smile. It always touches my heart, because if you just take a moment and just picture Halima Sa'diyah calling little Muhammad and Abdullah, they do crazy things. And so for just a moment, just imagine, you know, you have a young nephew who's 2 years old, or a younger brother who's 2 years old, or just think of a 2-year-old baby that you know. And think that at one point, Rasulullah was that young 2-year-old child who was running around, having fun, running around, just being a kid, being a child. And this is the purpose of Seerah, so that we can look at Rasulullah throughout his entire life, not just during prophethood. And it's beautiful. So one day, Halima, she saw that there was no children in the house. And this was shocking, because at this time, the sun was at its peak, was at its zenith. And it's Arabia, in the desert. And during this time of the day, the animals would all go and find shade and sit under the walls of houses or under the trees. Animals would go rest and nap until it cooled down. Human beings would go into their homes and rest until it cooled down before going out into the open again. And it was bad to be out in this type of heat. It could lead to illness. It could lead to heat exhaustion, heat stroke. So Halima Sa'diyah, she's looking for her children, and she looks outside and she sees that her daughter Shayma is sitting with Muhammad ﷺ outside in the middle of the grass. In the glaring heat, in the open glaring heat. They were not even sitting next to a wall under a tree. They were just sitting in the middle of the grass, open. And so they're laying down, they're sitting down, or both just chilling. And Halima Sa'diyah got angry. She got angry at Shayma. She said, I put you in charge. I put you in charge of Muhammad, and now you guys are both out in the open, not even in the shade. And she rushed out there, furiously yelling, it's hot, don't sit under the sun, get back inside. And so she scolds Shayma. She says, you know better. You know what you're doing. You know that he can get sick. He's just a little boy. You should know better than this. And Shayma said, no. Mama, you're misunderstanding. Everything is okay. I've been watching my little boy. One thing I noticed about him is that when he walks around in noontime, he walks around without a bother. And I wondered, how can he walk around in this heat without any discomfort? And so I looked up and I saw that there was always a cloud over him casting a shade on him. And he just comes out here and he just chills. So the reason why I was sitting next to him was actually to get some of that shade too. And so at the age of 2 years old, Halima Sa'diyah stopped nursing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In our Sharia, الوالدات يرضعن أولادهن حولين كاملين لمن أراد أن يتم الرضاعة. That mothers will breastfeed their offspring for 2 whole years, and for those who wish to complete the nursing of their child. So after 2 years, we're not supposed to nurse our children after that. And after that, those 2 years, it's time to return the child back to the mother. But let's be real. Why would Halima Sa'diyah want to give up this blessed child? She's fallen in love with him. Her heart is with him. She is in his heart. So she doesn't want to give him up. So Halima Sa'diyah, she goes to Amina. And she says, if you want, you can take him. Or I can keep nurturing him because he has a lot of potential. And Amina missed her son. She did not want to give him up. So at first she refused. There's no way. I know how special this child is too. I'm trying to get some of those blessings for myself too. But at that time, Amina started reflecting. And she started thinking. And there was a lot of babies in Mecca that were dying because there was a particular illness that was spread. And a mother has a lot of love for her son that she will sacrifice anything to do best for her son. So Amina reluctantly agrees and accepts the proposal of Halima and says that you can take him for some more time. And if you ever dangle the carrot of potential on a mother, what happens? They give in. Right? Who cares if I have to drive an hour to that Quran class every day? If it's best for my son, if it's best for my daughter, I'm going to do it. Who cares if I have to take him at 6 a.m. to basketball practice? If it's going to meet his potential, then it's okay, we'll do it. Notice this in your lives. Who were the one taking you to school? Who was the one taking you to extracurricular activities? Who was the one who was taking you to the masjid, to your Quran classes, to your sports, to all these different things that you were doing throughout your entire life? Who was taking you to all these things? It was always our parents. They would sacrifice everything in order for us to reach our potential. They would take us to Kuman. Allah has special mercy on the one who created Kuman. Always Kuman, and every Muslim went through Kuman. Now, she was able to convince Amina, and she brought Muhammad ﷺ back to Banu Samad. And for about 1.5 years, 2 years-ish, she spent time, Rasulullah ﷺ spent time with Halima Sa'diyah until there was an incident that occurred when he was 4 years old. And this incident is called Shaq Sadr. Now, because Rasulullah ﷺ was a special child, he had a larger intellect. He was stronger, he was more intelligent, he was more capable than a regular child. And because he remembers this incident so clearly, The scholars say that he must have been close to 4 or 4.5 years of age. The incident occurs, and there's multiple different versions of this story, and I'll try to kind of bring it all together if I can, inshallah ta'ala. But he's playing with his brother Abdullah, and he's playing with all the young sheep. They're running around, they're chasing the sheep, they're jumping on the sheep, and they're riding the sheep, etc., etc., etc. Being kids. Again, just take a moment and just imagine the young Rasulullah just playing around. Well, it just brings joy to your heart. And they were kind of far away. They were chilling. And so the Prophet ﷺ was thirsty, and so he told Abdullah, his brother, go get us something to drink. And then something happens that scares Abdullah and the child Rasulullah ﷺ. And Abdullah, Halima's biological son, comes running to his parents, yelling and panting. He says, over there, over there. Akhi al-Qurayshi, my Qurayshi brother, something happened to him. And Halima and her husband, Al-Harith, they rushed towards the direction that Abdullah was pointing at. And Muhammad and Abdullah were running around and they were playing that area that they were at, where their goats and sheep were grazing. And they were playing when Abdullah came to them terrified. And in one narration, while they were running towards the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Abdullah told his parents what scared him. So that 2 men came down. They were wearing white clothes. They laid my brother down and they started to cut him open. And so it freaked him out when he runs away. There's a second narration where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself gave his nursing parents a full account of what happened. Where he says 2 bird-like figures came from the sky. They lied me down. One of them took a tool and opened up my chest, took out 2 clots from my heart, and then washed my heart, and then washed it again, and then sealed my chest and then left. In a third narration, Rasulullah ﷺ told his companions years later this story, and he pulled his shirt off to show the cut that had happened. He had a scar from the hollow of his neck all the way to his navel. What had happened is the teacher and mentor of the Prophet Muhammad Jibreel alayhi salam, he has his eyes on the student, the greatest of all students. And this is an incident that occurred in order to prepare him for what is to come. And Anas ibn Malik, he says that as a servant of the Prophet Muhammad, when I was serving the Prophet, I saw that scar multiple times. Now the scholars say that Shaq al-Sadr happened authentically 2 times. There are 2 authentic moments where the Prophet this occurred, the splitting of the chest occurred. The first is right here, when he was a child, he was a baby, he was a young toddler. The second was before Isra wal Mi'raj, when he was 50 years old. There are 2 other times that are not authentic. Okay, so there's weakness to them. So there's 2 other times that this incident happened, but they're not authentic. And those 2 times are when he was about 10 or 12 years old, right before puberty, and right before receiving the first revelation. Okay? So those 2 are both weak. And the first 2, which is when he was born, or when he was 4 years old, and right before Isra and Mi'raj, those are authentically reported. So the Prophet, he comes home, his face is pale. And he comes home to tell Halima Sa'di what happened. And Halima al-Harith and Abdullah, they reached over to Muhammad and they found the Prophet Muhammad was standing there, looking very pale, very frightened. So al-Harith asked Muhammad my dear son, what happened to you? And the Prophet Muhammad said, 2 men came to me. They were wearing white clothes. They laid me down on my back and then they split me open. They took something out from me and they threw it away. Then they put everything back. And so as the Prophet Muhammad recalled this memory years and years later, he said that 2 men came down from the sky as if they were flying down. And they wore white clothing and they took my heart out and split it. And they took some sort of black blood clot and they pulled it away from my heart and threw it away. One of the 2 men said, where is the dish? And the dish was made of gold. and there was ice in the Zamzam water in the dish. The Prophet ﷺ continued and said, they took my heart out, they took out some black element that represents evil or sin, and then they washed my heart. And they also washed my inside and put the heart back in. And after the men performed those procedures, they had a conversation with one another. Okay? By the way, one of these men is the angel Jibreel alayhi salam. He is the one coming to visit Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they had a conversation where the two angels spoke to each other. And one angel said, weigh him against 10 people of his own. The Prophet ﷺ, recalled years later, said that I outweighed them. And the angel said that weigh him against 100 people of his own. And the Prophet ﷺ said, I outweighed them. And the angel said that weigh him against 1,000 people of his own. And the Prophet ﷺ said, I outweighed them. Then the angel said, then leave him, because if I was to weigh him against all the people of his ummah, he would outweigh them. What the angels were weighing, the scholars say, was the Prophet Muhammad's iman. It was his endurance. It was his emotional fortitude. It outweighed everyone else's combined. There's a very interesting narration where the Prophet, he says that I have been threatened more than anyone else, and I have been hurt more than anyone else. On his deathbed, which we'll get to way down the line, Rasulullah ﷺ was experiencing the pains of death. And since the soul was getting ready to transition from dunya to akhirah, he asked Jibreel alayhi salam, who was there to comfort the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? Is this pain something that everyone goes through? And Jibreel alayhi salam said, yes, this is something that everyone will experience. It's not a punishment. It's just the soul that is preparing to depart from this world. And so the Prophet ﷺ made a dua that many of the companions heard. And this dua was, oh Allah, I will take all of this pain. I will take all this suffering from all of my ummah. Please do not put anybody from my ummah through this pain. I will endure it all. And so we see that these types of narrations show that the Prophet ﷺ could put up with more than the average human being. So Halima Sa'adiyya thinks that it was a jinn. It was jinn that possessed him, and I don't want anything to do with this baby anymore before the bad effects of the jinn start to take place in our life. We maximize the blessings of the child, time to give him back. So she rushes to give him back to Amina and says to Amina that I want to give back the child. So Amina asked, why are you guys back so early? And they replied, we've already fulfilled our original contract in 2 years. So here you are. And Amina said, no, something happened. You look frightened. The way you negotiated with me to take him away again, I thought that I would never see my son again. I thought that I would have to be the one to come get my child, because I never thought that you would return my child again. Now you're in a hurry to get rid of him. You're in a hurry to take off, so you need to tell me what happened. This is my child, and I want to know exactly what happened. And the reason why they didn't want to tell Amina what happened is because Al-Hadith, he said that we don't want to worry his mother. His mother's already dealing with a lot. Not having her husband, right? Now going to have to raise this child all on her own. She's going through a lot already, so let's not put more of a burden on her than is already on her. So let's not tell her what happened. But Amina would not leave them until they told her the details of what happened. So Halim al-Hadith recounted the experience that Rasulullah ﷺ had. And after hearing it all, Amina asked, are you worried that shaitan or some other evil force or spirit or demon is going to harm him, is going to do something to him? Do you want me to tell you something about this child, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You don't need to worry. Whatever's happened, it's nothing bad. Because shaitan can't do anything to him. This son of mine, he's going to be someone very, very special. There's something momentous in his future. You want me to really tell you about him? And he says, of course. So when I was pregnant with him, I could not feel anything. I felt no extra weight, no burden, no difficulty. I would see dreams. When he was born into this world, the light of the world lit up. The palaces of Sham began to illuminate. He didn't cry when he was born. He leaned forward with his hands. He raised his head up to the sky, and the entire house became filled with nur. And so Amina went to tell Halima and Harith that about the miracles surrounding Muhammad, and that the angels would come and talk to her and to name her baby a certain name and that she should be given. So Amina said, don't worry about anything. Nothing bad has happened to him, and nothing bad can happen to him or happen to this child. And so with that, Halima and Harith left the Prophet ﷺ to the care of his mother Amina and went back home. And Halima Sa'diyah now exits the story. Now, there are questions regarding the validity of this incident that a lot of Orientalists try to bring up and dismiss such events in the Prophet's life. They call it preposterous. How could we believe such a thing? A medical procedure like this taking place 1400 years ago. This is just the imagination of Muslims, etc., etc., etc. But the reality is these events come to us from authentic sources. So we cannot deny them, we cannot reject them. And believing something out of the ordinary in regards to the Prophet's life is a test of our own iman. And that if something extends beyond what we grasp as reality or possibility, that does not mean that it's not true. So much of the Quran could fall under that context. And we see that some of the same people will only come to terms to accept things from the Quran when it can be made to fit their grasp of reality, or it can be catered to their rationality. But for us, primarily, what we need to do is accept and believe in something that is a test of our iman. It's not far-fetched to us believing something like this. But at that same time, we have balance. We're not going to read into the story and incident so much that we're going to say that, so every human being has an evil black element in their heart. So what we're going to do is start performing open heart surgeries on the entire Muslim community and remove any blackness in their hearts. Right? Then I don't have to worry about ever sinning again. We've been cured. Right? Now, obviously, that's not going to be the case. There's ikhtisas here that is happening. Something that is particular to the Prophet, that's unique to the Prophet. So it's necessary to maintain a balance when we talk about this. And we don't take it so literally that we start performing surgery on people to remove the blackness of their heart. But at the same time, we don't completely dismiss it because it doesn't fall within the grasp of our reality. Oh, because I can't make sense of it scientifically, medically, it must be bogus. No, we believe this happened. And it happened by the divine instruction, by the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it was specific to the Prophet. Now, what are some wisdoms to this Shaq as-Salah? Why did this happen? One time Aisha radiallahu anha, she was acting out. So the Prophet Muhammad asked her if she was feeling jealous. And Aisha radiallahu anha said, yes, of course I'm jealous. And the Prophet said, your shaitan has gotten a hold of you. Your shaitan has gotten the best of you, and that's why you feel jealous. Aisha radiallahu anha, she asked, does everyone have a shaitan? And the Prophet said, yes. Everyone has a shaitan that is attached to them, who tries to take them into the wrong path. So Aisha asked, even you, O Rasulullah? And the Prophet said, yes, even a shaitan has attached himself to me. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made him a Muslim. In one narration he says that, in another narration he says, but my shaitan has no control over me and I control him. He doesn't get the best of me. So this chest, splitting of the chest, served as a cleansing of the heart of Rasulullah, freeing him from the influences of the nafs, of the carnal desires, and other evil influences. And it is the sunnah of Allah that the prophets are infallible, that the prophets have perfect character. And so this event was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preparing the Prophet for a life of exemplary conduct. Some scholars of tafsir, they note that the verse, أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ, have we not expanded your heart for you? Have we not expanded your chest for you? Refers to the event of Shaq as-Sadr. And so that washing of the Prophet Muhammad's heart in Zamzam water by the angels was strengthening the heart of Rasulullah to be able to receive divine revelation, to be able to bear the Quran. It's a very heavy task. It's a very large task to go through. إِنَّا سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in Surah Al-Muzammil that indeed we will cast upon you a heavy word. And so, one thing that was asked multiple times throughout this course already is, how did Rasulullah, how was he shocked when he received revelation? And the reality is, as I answered before, it's not that he was shocked that he received revelation, because the signs were there. There was something special happening with him. He was being prepared to have a special task. But when that task was given to him, this heavy burden, this very difficult responsibility of bearing revelation when it was revealed to him, he himself may have not felt ready. So he came to Aisha, Zammiluni, Zammiluni, or Khadija, sorry, Zammiluni, Zammiluni, cover me, cover me. And when he accounts what happened and how Jibreel alayhi salam came and revealed the Quran to him, what did she say to him? She said, your Lord will never forsake you. You may not feel ready, but clearly you are, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has now put you up to this responsibility, this task. And they went to Waraq bin Nawfal to confirm how to go about it. So this task, it's a very tough task. And Aisha recall the time, it was literally heavy. It wasn't just spiritually heavy, but it was also physically heavy. One time Rasulullah was resting, and he was resting his head on the thigh of Aisha. And he began to receive revelation right there. And his head became so heavy that his head was about to crush the leg of Aisha. She was crying, she was screaming, she couldn't carry the weight of his head on her leg. Sometimes Rasulullah would be sitting on an animal and receive divine revelation. And that camel and donkey would sit down, it would moan because of the heavy discomfort. So when receiving divine revelation, the Prophet also sometimes he would become completely red and he would sweat profusely. So it was a difficult thing. There was a lot of pressure. So the heart of Rasulullah had to be completely cleansed. Now everything that happens to the Prophet was by divine decree. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fixed the Prophet's life experiences into a divine plan in order for it to serve as a lesson for us in coming generations. So as we'll see next week, inshallah, Rasulullah is going to lose his mother as well. And the fact that Prophet lost his parents is no coincidence. And the fact that two of the milk mothers of the Prophet were African, they were black, in an Arabian society that prided themselves on their ethnicity and in their color of the kin was not a coincidence. Or that the paternal aunt of the Prophet was albino was not a coincidence. It's to establish here that there's no superiority in terms of race, something that I wanted to touch on a little bit more. But these are the people who shaped the greatest person to ever exist. And it's unfortunate that 1400 years later, it seems like many of our cultures have lost this way. That there is racism in our cultures, there's racism in our messages, there's racism within the same culture somehow. Racism everywhere. But racism, without a doubt, without any hyperbole or without any exaggeration, wallahi, it is a satanic calling. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that when Iblis was instructed to do sujood to Adam alayhi salam, what did he say? خَلَقْتَنِي مِنْ نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِنْ طِينٍ. That you created me from fire and you created him from mud, clay. وَأَنَا خَيْرٌ مِنْهُ. And I am better. How does that make any logical sense? It's literally the first case of racism, of arrogance, because racism comes from arrogance. That somehow, because of the way I was created, I'm better than you. Right? What objective standard is Shaitan using to say that he's better than I? There's none. As a matter of fact, if you look at it, if you throw dirt onto fire, what happens? It extinguishes the fire. So as we mentioned before in narration, where the Prophet told us in narration Sahih Muslim that every person has a shaitan that is attached to them. You being created from clay, us being created from the earth, we all have that ability to extinguish the shaitan within us. You have the strength, you have the capability, you have the spiritual, moral, mental, physical strength to overcome all desires. to overcome all evils, to overcome all calls to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. جزاك الله خير. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.